All right, so welcome to I Give a Fit channel. On day 26 of the Push Pull Legs Challenge by Derby. It's been a really good, really challenging challenge, I must say. Um, Today is a pull day, so we're doing bicep curls, upright rows, bent over rows, shrugs, hammer curls, and a sixth exercise this time, renegade rows. I'm going to be mix and matching weights just like previously because I've progressed on certain things and uh, I need a little bit lighter for anything with my shoulder because my shoulder is still a little in pain, my right shoulder. But yeah, I think I'm gonna use the 35s for the bicep curls, 25s for the upright rows, 50-pound kettlebells for bent over rows, shrugs, 35 pounds for hammer curls, and I'll use the 35s for the renegade rows as well. So I'm only lowering the weight for the upright rows because of my shoulder. So make sure you go follow my friend Angela Stevens. She's doing this challenge with me this month at Angela Stevens 21 on YouTube, and I believe she's on Twitch as well. Yeah, let's get it cracking. Yep. But first, I gotta find something to watch because that's what I do. You are. You're like 10 years younger. Stop it. This month I was doing a light bulk because I knew I'd be lifting real heavy. Next month I'm going back to cutting again for March and probably April for that challenge since it's not going to be a lot of lifting, so I can tone up with all the muscle that I've gained over the past month. So it's going to be great. And I've gained a lot of muscle, especially in my fucking legs, man. It's crazy. My arms are getting huge too. Let's watch some Satanic Panic stuff, shall we?
Anywhere from grammar school on up. Yeah, but it's just your character that he does it on the sheet of paper. Not so with a lot of adults, and says there are 28 deaths related to Dungeons and Dragons. We're really talking about intense involvement in a very serious form of violence. She felt so strongly that it was responsible for her son's death that she formed a network of concerned people who warned others about the dangerous aspects of the game.
With the new season of Stranger Things heavily involving the Satanic Panic, I thought now would be as good a time as ever to discuss what the Satanic Panic was, its events, history, and impacts. The Satanic Panic began when D&D was thought to influence its players to suicide or murder, among many other abhorrent practices too, like cannibalism, demon summoning, witchcraft, and accurate biology, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So the first supposed connection begins with James Dallas Egbert III. In 1979, 16-year-old child prodigy James Dallas Egbert III disappeared from his room at Michigan State University. Now, you have to understand the situation around James. He was 16 at the time, a child prodigy away from home in a new place, and he had fallen into a drug addiction. James was found in the utility tunnels underneath the university, which came to be known as the Steam Tunnel Incident. Private investigator William Deere attributed all this to Dungeons and Dragons. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what was the connection to Dungeons and Dragons? And it was simply that James played Dungeons and Dragons, and he really liked it. Yeah. And because of this, James Egbert did not receive the help and care he desperately needed. I mean, he basically stopped playing the game altogether. James later died from a self inflicted gunshot wound in 1980. Despite the evidence regarding his mental health problems, Egbert's suicide was thought to be caused by Dungeons and Dragons. And so this is how our little clown story begins. It just takes this story to be adapted into a movie, Mazes and Monsters, starring Tom Hanks. It's a story roughly based on the events in James's life. What are you doing?
Going to join the Great Hall.
Can't. It's a trap.
I have spells. I'm going to fly.
You don't have enough points. I am the base controller.
Base control. Base control.
Yes. And I have absolute authority in this game.
JJ, what am I doing here?
And despite the obvious theme that explores the sensitive case of the death of a mentally ill child, because James wasn't even 18 yet, the movie did harm D&D as a name, as Mazes and Monsters obviously refers to Dungeons and Dragons. The movie itself portrays the players as prone to psychotic breaks and suicide. Throughout the movie, it is clear that there are moments when characters just lose all touch with reality. And again, there are multiple suicide attempts throughout the movie. So that's where we start. Now let's discuss our second landmark case, which is Irving Lee Pulley II. He was nicknamed Bink by his family. And in 1982, his family, the Pulley family, came home one night and found him dead on the front lawn after he shot himself through the heart. Now, reports from the Washington
Two down,
Times
two to
says
go.
that Bink was struggling with many different personal problems. And classmates back this up. Victoria Rock Charlie, a classmate of Irving Pulley, commented that he had a lot of problems anyway that weren't associated with the game. Basically, all the reports say, and all the classmates confirm, that Dungeons and Dragons was not the cause of Bink's suicide. He was also thought by other reports that Bink might have been struggling with his own sexuality, which would have been difficult under such a religious household. And getting to that religious household, it is Patricia Pat Pulling, the mother of Bink, who made the connection to Dungeons and Dragons. And that's how the Pulling case became known as another Dungeons and Dragons suicide. But now let's start talking about murder, specifically the murder of Heath Von Stein. I'm just going to call him Von Stein. Von Stein was killed by his stepson, Chris Pritchard. The way the incident was reported was that Von Stein and Bonnie, Chris Pritchard's mother, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. Then a masked assailant rushes into the bedroom, kills Von Stein, and then beats Bonnie nearly to death. Now you might be asking, well, what was the motive? Well, in fact, Von Stein was rich. He had a $2 million fortune, and in today's money, that's roughly about $5 million. Now, Chris Pritchard hated Von Stein and also wanted the money, so he got to kill him. Along with his friends, investigators traced the crime back to Pritchard and members from his Dungeons and Dragons group. They traced the crime to Dungeons and Dragons because one of Pritchard's D&D maps had been outfitted to look like his home. However, investigators also learned that over the course of a year, that Pritchard had become involved with drugs and alcohol while attending university. However, this information was disregarded. And then once again, this murder was turned into entertainment. Firstly, it was turned into a movie called Blood Games, and then a TV show called Honor Thy Mother. So once again, the entertainment industry profited from these tragedies, debunking claims. There is one clear through line with all of these D&D suicide murder cases, though. All the people involved were mentally ill or were dealing with their own demons. They
Three down,
needed
one to go.
help. Like, they needed psychological help. But because these murder suicides were pinned on Dungeons and Dragons, they did not get that help. Most people just assumed if you can stop them playing Dungeons and Dragons and take them to church enough, they'll be fine. But as we all know, they were not fine. Now remember William Deere, the private investigator who started connecting the dots between Dungeons and Dragons and suicide? Well, later he admitted that he made a mistake. He actually wrote a book during the height of the Satanic Panic called The Dungeon Master, where he outlined his new thoughts. And let me just read this verbatim for a second. Deere also acknowledged that James's domineering mother and his struggles with his own sexuality had more to do with his problems than his interest in role-playing games. Honestly, it just sucks that this is the start of the Satanic Panic, that this investigator, who later retracted his statement, was the one who started it all. But you know what the worst part is? No one even cared that William Deere retracted his statement. In fact, the Satanic Panic only grew after he retracted that statement. But William Deere did care. And while it does nothing now, since he's dead, I think it's important to acknowledge a man coming out and saying he's wrong. And maybe we could use a lot more of that. Patricia Pulling. But all this, it was just the origin story for our main villain, Pat Pulling. Remember Bink, Irving Pulling? Well, if William Deere is the one who struck the match, it was Pat Pulling who threw gasoline onto the fire. Bink's mother sent the Satanic Panic hurtling into what it would become. After seeing Mazes and Monsters, hearing about Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm not sure if Pat ever fully understood it, and being a fundamentalist Christian woman living in Virginia, Pulling was convinced it was Dungeons and Dragons that drove Bink to suicide. So, what could Patricia Pulling do? Well, of course, she had to sue her son's principal because she thought that the principal had put a curse on Bink, and that's what drove him to suicide. I'm not joking. And let me repeat that. She intended to sue the principal because she thought that he put a curse on Bink because he ran a D&D game. Now some backstory. This was part of the community program that the principal ran. They played everything from Monopoly to chess and, yes, Dungeons and Dragons. It was just part of the rotation. This was something that this principal did to keep kids out of trouble. Obviously, the suit blacked out in court, so Pat did the only thing she could think of. Sue the makers of D&D, TSR, for making the
All
game
right.
that killed her
All
son.
done.
This
2-minute
case
break.
was too dismissed, so Pat did the only reasonable thing after that. She sued the publishers of D&D for publishing the game that killed her son, and that case was too dismissed. So now we have 3 dismissed cases, one against the principal, one against TSR, and one against the publishers. Now you think that Pat might have learned, but this did not dampen Pat Pulling's feelings about D&D. And let me read you a quote by her. Pulling described D&D as a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic-type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, sadism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics, divination, and other teachings. What? Really, Pat, you didn't get it all in there. I thought you covered basically every ism in the book. Because, look, I understand the witchcraft, gambling, sure, cannibalism. I mean, that's a bit rough, but we can get through it. But I draw the line at homosexuality. I mean, sure, demon summoning, that's terrible. But it pales in comparison to someone being gay or blaspheming the Lord. Now, from here, cat pulling begins to become a private investigator and begins to investigate. Now, you might be asking, Colin, did she get caught trespassing multiple times? Yeah, she did. Was she arrested? I couldn't find an arrest record, so I'm going to say no. Did she harass a lot of people? What do you think? Yes. Pat Bulling also became an expert in occult activity and was brought in as an expert witness many times to talk about the dangers of Dungeons and Dragons and what it did to faith. In 1989, she even wrote a book, The Devil's Web: Who is Stalking Your Children for Satan? And I did my civic duty, and I read part of the book, and it was laughably bad. It contains essentially every stereotype that you're probably thinking in your head and more. And look, no matter what you think, it's just clear that this book is horribly researched, if Pat did any research at all. Pat really had no understanding of how the game worked, or just chose not to listen to what people were telling her. I unfortunately think that it's the second option. And I truly do get, after researching Pat Bulling, that this was a woman stricken by grief who was trying to wrestle with him, but did not have the right resources to do so. And in the end, did a lot of harm to a lot of people. And we'll talk about how bad Pat Bulling's research is later, because an author essentially did the literary equivalent of a diss track. And it was so epic and so great that it destroyed Pat Bulling's credibility. But we'll talk about that later, so stick around for the rest of the video. But through it all, Pat Bulling still thought about those three dismissed cases. It didn't sit right with her. She knew that this was the beginning of her villain arc, although it kind of already began. And you might be asking, wait a minute, I thought she already had entered her villain arc. No, it's about to get worse. Pat Bulling created an organization called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. And some of you are like, wait, that's an acronym for.
After her son's death, Pat Bulling thoroughly investigated the game. She felt so strongly that it was responsible for her son's death that she formed a network of concerned people who warned others about the dangerous aspects of the game. Because of her involvement with D&D, Mrs. Bulling is often consulted by me.
Like, I cannot even describe how cartoonishly evil Bad was. They lied, harassed, and tried to do everything possible to get rid of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I will say, for the purposes of academic integrity, that Irving Lee Pulling Sr., the husband of Pat Pulling, said that basically Bad did not want to destroy Dungeons and Dragons. He said, quote, she never set out to ban anything. She only wanted to educate parents. But actions speak louder than words, and we have to look at what actually happened. The Chicago Sun-Times in 1987 had this to say about Bad as an organization and their mission goals. They say between the violent nature of the game and the steadily increasing violent behavior of its players is why Bad is doing this. To combat this, Dungeons and Dragons, these well-meaning individuals want the game outright banned. And yeah, that was Bad's mission. They were trying to get the game banned,
One
or
down.
at least heavily.
Three to go.
And really, the difference is just how Christian was your area. If you were in the South and heavily Christian, they were trying to get it banned. If you were in a place like California, Massachusetts, they were trying to get it heavily restricted. They knew their audience. Bad launched an extensive campaign that targeted the mainstream Christian audience across America. And Bad's biggest victory was getting on 60 Minutes. I encourage you to watch this entire 60-minute segment, and I'm going to put the link in the video description because it's just so eye-opening to how things were at the time. It is honestly mind-blowing. I don't think we could honestly conceive of such a thing today. I don't know, maybe recent events. Now, here are some of the most important clips from the segment.
Dr. Thomas Rebecki is a psychiatrist who teaches at the University of Illinois Medical School and who is chairman of the National Coalition on Television Violence. He has been studying the game for several years and says there are 28 deaths related to Dungeons and Dragons in the last 5 years.
It's not coincidence. Now, when we have careful documentation, we have careful notes, we have eyewitnesses. For instance, one case with parents who actually saw their child summon the Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself. Another case, the kid thought he had been
money is make-believe, the property is make-believe, and the bankruptcy is make-believe. The important thing to remember is, if you're playing a character, let's say for instance you have an evil character, the rules tell you your evil character is allowed to go through the rules to murder people in the right plunder. If you're playing a good character, you're the defender of the people. You try to stop people from the right plunder. Yeah. But it's just your character that's on the sheet of paper. When the game is over, the game does not show you to the right plunder.
Three things about those kids.
Two down, two
That
down.
psychiatrist who did the study, yeah, all that data has been disproved. The study counted the same suicides multiple times, and basically any mention of Dungeons and Dragons was a strong connection. It's one of those catch-22s. No matter what someone did, it was basically a strong connection to Dungeons and Dragons, unless they basically burned their books. Two, I have a problem with the kids that they interviewed because they are very uncomfortable and don't do a great job of explaining themselves. And the entire segment definitely has an anti-Dungeons and Dragons slant. I would have loved to see what those kids actually said instead of just cherry picking some not great comments. Basically, I think the interview with the players was cut to fit a narrative and really is just laden with a lot of bias. Number three, poor Gary Gygax. At the time, he was a practicing Christian, and you can see that he has no idea how people could actually mistake Dungeons and Dragons for satanic worship. I mean, the man is coming right out and saying it. He's saying it's make-believe. It's like Monopoly or any other game. It's just fun. And you all have to understand at this point that the anti-Dungeons and Dragons crowd was not reasonable. They weren't acting rationally. Stranger Things Season 4 actually does a good job showing how the movement was driven by emotional fervor, ignorance, and a desire to return to a social purity that never existed. And I'd love to say that these efforts were unsuccessful, but as we all know, they were incredibly successful at swaying public opinion. Panic at the Satanic. Let's document some other notable events that happened during the Satanic Panic. Firstly, that was so successful, they almost got the government involved. The Federal Trade Commission actually looked into Dungeons and Dragons
All right, 3-0,
restricting
1-0.
or outright banning the game due to multiple self-appointed consumer watchdogs going after the game. Additionally, Christian sects all across America began to denounce Dungeons and Dragons. In 1985, Reverend John Quinley of the Lakeview Full Gospel Fellowship had this to say about Dungeons and Dragons. The game is an occult tool that opens up young people to influence or possession by demons. Now, unfortunately, Reverend John was an important figure in stirring up the panic during this time. His sermons, interviews, and articles spread like wildfire across the nation. Quigley's teaching spread from his home church in Georgia and influenced other congregations as far north as Vermont, as far south as Texas, and as far west as California. The point is, churches across America attacked the game and its players. Again, look to Stranger Things Season 4, because that whole situation, that happened
Alright.
twice.
Again,
And during this
next
time,
is Bent Over
media
Roads with the
completely
Kevin
a
Mouse.
very different picture of the game. Let's look at the most
After a
famous
2-minute break, of
example of
course.
anti-D&D media in the Satanic Panic, Dark Dungeons. Dark Dungeons is a story about Debbie, and she gets involved in a D&D group, and then things go quickly off the rails. The dungeon master, Miss Frost, has Debbie begin occult rituals. Then, Debbie starts to get dark powers and even mind controls her parents into buying her more D&D figures. Yeah, that happens in the story. However, one of Debbie's friends, Marcy, kills herself because she died in the game. This is a common thing in the Satanic Panic where a lot of people who didn't know the game thought that if you died in the game, that players would kill themselves in real life. Now, after learning of Marcy's death, Miss Frost goes full evil and basically tells Debbie to forget Marcy because she was weak. And Debbie does the only thing that she can do. Debbie goes to a priest and learns that all this is devil stuff and wrong. The story ends when Debbie burns all her books and the reader gets a neat little card to fill out. And I just love the blatant allusions to so much history revolving book burning. Like, yeah, you don't like the game, but really you're gonna go and burn the books? I mean, they didn't actually burn the, oh wait, yes, they did actually burn the D&D books. Yeah, it's exactly what you think. And from here, we're moving on to the real mainstream media, and we have to talk about one thing: you have to understand, a moral panic is great for ratings, so any chance that they could get, they would milk the satanic panic because people would tune in to watch. And while there are too many stories to talk about, let's talk about the most impactful one, Satanic Cults and Children, which aired November 19th, 1987, during the heart of the satanic panic. Basically, Geraldo Rivera dug into satanic cults and partially connected it to Dungeons and Dragons. And this is such a big deal because, and I quote, his programs probably have the greatest influence on public opinion. Geraldo was a professional reporter, so people took him at his word. And boy, oh boy, was his word a lot. He stated, estimates are that there are over 1 million Satanists in this country. The majority of them are linked in a highly organized, very secretive network. From small towns to large cities, they have attracted police and FBI attention to their satanic ritual, child abuse, child pornography, and grisly satanic rituals. The odds are that this is happening in your town. Obviously, those numbers aren't even close to right. But with numbers being that high and the threat seeming imminent, the panic skyrocketed. And now we have to give Geraldo Rivera his due. Since this segment aired, Geraldo has retracted his statements. He has also apologized for the damage he caused to innocent people. And I think we have to acknowledge that many people have come out since the panic and have retracted their statements. Geraldo was one of the first and ought to be commended for doing so. All right, let's play a little game now. I'm going to give you a few quotes, and you write in the comments which one you think is false. No cheating, please. All right, first quote. We aren't sure at this point whether we have a double suicide or a suicide homicide.
One down, three to go.
Dungeons and Dragons appeals to very intelligent people who use their imagination to manipulate characters and work through a series of mazes to achieve treasures and avoid falling into the dungeon. My understanding is that once you reach a certain point where you are the master, your only way out is death. That way, no one can beat you. Crazy quote. Let's get to number 2. Dungeons and Dragons is a game created by the Satanic. It is the path to witchcraft and sadism. There are more than 600 fully fledged practicing witches in mid-Wolamonte Valley, and we don't need any more. Oh, geez, 600 witches. Is that true? Who knows? Let's get to the third quote. Now, this quote's a bit longer. Wouldn't fear for my mortal soul, dear Edgar. This has been an interesting week. Sunday night, I tuned into the tail end of 60 Minutes and was confronted with some lady in a big flap about the game Dungeons and Dragons. I never did get her point, whether she wants the game taken off the market or just wanted to publicly air her sorrow over the suicide of her son, which she blames on D&D. I commiserate. Losing a teen or a preteen child to suicide must be the most agonizing thing a parent can face. The rest I took with a grain of salt. My younger son has played D&D since the 3rd grade, and it has never occurred to me to check him for suicidal tendencies. In 8 years he has been playing, I spent close to $600 on books, modules, dice, lead figures, and other countermeasures in the game. I guarantee you, when I spend that kind of money, I pay attention to what it's all about. I've listened to many an hour of it. I don't exactly see what they get out of it. It seems rather boring to me, but I've had games continue on the kitchen table for days and fail to see the harm in it. 2 days later, I hear on the radio that AC/DC cannot appear at Prairie Capital Convention Center because the local clergy and a few concerned parents think that their music promotes Satanism. Amazing! Now I suppose I'll have to keep watch on my cats and neighbors' dogs in case my sons decide to indulge in some of the more gory rites of satanic sacrifices. After all, we have and play every AC/DC album that's been cut. I secretly want to go to the concert myself, but really couldn't because, first, I'd embarrass my kids to death, and second, my eardrums can't take the decibel level they could when I was 16. But if I did decide to go, I surely wouldn't do so in fear of my mortal soul or my sons. If people don't want their kids to go, keep them home. Or if they don't want them playing D&D, don't buy the game. What has that got to do with the rest of us? I think all this brouhaha is ridiculous. A very reasonable person speaking in defense of Dungeons and Dragons. Is it real? Maybe. All right, number 4. Dungeons and Dragons is essentially a worship of violence. It's a very intense war game. Talk to people who have played it. It's fascinating. It's a game of fun. But when you have fun with murder, that's dangerous. When you make a game out of war, that's harmful. The game is full of human sacrifice, killing babies, drinking blood, rape, murder of every variety, and curses of insanity. It's just a very violent game. All right, one last quote about a corrupted D&D player named Abby from a local paper. Not only have they perverted our kids' minds, they have corrupted responsible adults. Even dear Abby had the gall to question one of our members who teaches that women have one more rib than men. Read in Genesis. In our own backyard, the staff of Calipoya Middle School practices witchcraft. They allow kids to play Dungeons and Dragons. Did you know that there are over 600 practicing witches in the area? Some of them, may the Lord forgive me, even believe the earth is more than a few thousand years old. Man, this place with so many practicing witches, crazy. And also, poor sweet Abby who actually has her biology right, because women don't actually have one more rib than men, and the earth is more than a few thousand years old. Now, by this point, I'm sure you can guess that that is a real quote. But what about the others? All right, write your answer in the comments below. Done? Well, it leads to the second quote about the other 600 witches, and it was based off of the teachings of Reverend John Quigley. Remember him? His teachings got spread far and wide, and he actually did think that there were more than 600 witches around him performing their dark magic. Basically, the information was accurate, the quote just was not exact. The fourth quote has an interesting backstory as well, because that is from a practicing psychiatrist and the chairman of the National Coalition of Television Violence in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Now you might be thinking, how can someone in that position possibly say that quote? Well, because they just didn't check or check well. Because you see, the people in power rode the wave of panic and false reports. False reports that were mostly written by, you guessed it, bad and catcalling. I told you catcalling was the villain of our story. It all comes back to bad.
All
They
done with the
kept
rows.
pushing
Next to
their
shrugs.
rhetoric about the entire movement. Catcalling and
After a
people
2-minute
spread
break.
so much false information that as I was reviewing official documents, I could literally just see their stink, their telltale like just buzzwords all over the documents. But there was hope. Remember that third quote? Well, it represented a growing counter movement to the fundamentalist panic. Because look, once things like rock and roll, teachers, and other fantasy books began to be targeted, people started to wake up and go, wait a minute, this is wrong. I don't understand these other things, but I understand this that is close to me. And as the web began to grow wider, people started to understand that it was bullshit. And now we finally get to the literary diss track that ended Pat Pulling's reign of terror. Kind of. The Pulling Report. Eventually, author Michael Stackpole had enough. He was a fantasy author with a platform and the means to stand up to Pulling. In 1990, Stackpole published the Pulling Report, in which he documented numerous errors made by Bad and accused Pulling of misrepresenting her credentials as an expert witness on games. And look, I can't go into the full report because it's just so long, but it is wonderful. It's a systematic takedown of everything wrong with Pat Pulling's information. I highly suggest you guys read the Pulling Report, and maybe I'll do a video on it if you guys want me to. And again, the Pulling Report is a beast. It absolutely shattered Pat Pulling's credibility. This, combined with another article written by Stackpole, Game Hysteria and the Truth, recontextualized for many people in higher positions of authority what bad really was. And that it was bad. So Pulling's authority began to collapse after that, and in addition, her health started to fail her. Pulling eventually succumbed to cancer, and by the year 2000, Bad had essentially dissolved. And the report's impact can still be felt today, despite the fall of Bad. It is routinely cited in articles and arguments to defend D&D and tabletop RPGs to this very day. Michael Stackpole gave the D&D community the shield to defend ourselves. So, thanks, Mr. Stackpole. You're such a cool guy. And honestly, I hope this video reaches you because you have done so much for the D&D community. And I just want to say thank you. And also, if you could correct anything that was wrong in this video, because you know so much more about pulling and all that stuff than me, but we just need to thank him. And from Stackpole, the tide began to turn. from about 2000 on, we started to get actual academic studies about the connection between D&D and mental health. D&D and mental health. All right, lot to go over. Studies by the American Association of Suicidology, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, and Health and Welfare Canada all found no causal link between D&D and suicide. Yeah, pretty crazy, right? But the studies kept on coming. Check out this one from 2015. The psychological understanding regarding Dungeons and Dragons has completely changed. In fact, in a study titled Psychiatrists' Perceptions of Role-Playing Games, psychiatrists do not associate role-playing games such as Dungeons and Dragons with poor mental health. But now it's time for the coup de grace, the most damning piece of evidence, because I'd like to remind you how all this started. The supposed connection between Dungeons and Dragons and suicide. The American Association of Suicidology and the Centers for Disease Control and the National Safety Council, among others, investigated the levels of suicide amongst RPG players in relation to national statistics on youth suicide in Canada and the United States. They found that while overall level of youth suicide was 5,300 per year, there had only been 128 suicide attempts by game players reported by BAN, an affiliate organization between 1979 and 1988. Furthermore, most of these acclaimed suicides were simply accumulated from unsourced newspaper clippings, often referring to the same incidents several times over. According to the estimated number of RPG gamers in the country at that time, there should have been at least 1,060 gamer suicides in the same period. Consequently, the finding of the report was that suicide amongst RPG gamers was actually significantly lower than the national averages for the age demographic of 15 to 25-year-olds. Yeah, folks, that's an 88% decrease in suicides for people who are playing Dungeons and
First
Dragons.
night out.
A decrease. But you know what boils my blood the most? We fucking knew it in 1987. Here's a report from that year. Studies have shown that depression and suicidal tendencies are not typically associated with role players. Feelings of alienation are not associated with mainstream players. According to one study, there is no significant correlation between years of playing the game and emotional stability. They buried the reports. They knew there was no connection to D&D and suicide in 1987.
Oh, your camera's right here.
They did it.
I was posing perfect.
Everything. Let's be honest here. People didn't care about these kids. They didn't care about the people committing suicide or getting them the help that they so desperately needed. That's what enrages me the most. That this information was actually there, but it only started coming to light, and people started only acknowledging the academic studies, acknowledging William Deere decades after the fact. No one cared about the truth in the satanic panic, and people got hurt because of it. And I think that's what causes damage. Speculations. Now we're going to start getting into some speculations on my part about why the satanic panic happened. So take everything here with a grain of salt. Here is the chart. What does this chart describe? This chart, and many like it, show that since World War II, religion has been declining in the United States. That's nothing new. But then, in the 1980s, it starts to hold flat. It starts to stop. And the peaks and valleys, they correlate to the peaks and valleys of the satanic panic when these big incidents happened. Preachers and other people, like Pat Floyd, who spoke out against Satanism and connected to Dungeons and Dragons, got recognition. The pastors, they grew their congregations. The media, they got more views. And parents didn't have to face the fact that something in their child's life drove them to suicide. And instead, they blamed the game. And you know why these people did this? Because it was easier than just being decent human beings. People profited off the suicides of these people. They profited off of the fear mongering as well. And they profited off taking something away that people held dear. Now, the LGBTQ plus is a large portion now of the D&D community, and it always has been. While the connection to James Egbert is clear that he probably was part of the LGBTQ plus community, my research shows that it's likely that many others were too fit these descriptions. They were, as you know, living in a different time, growing up around people who, in general, they didn't feel would accept them. D&D for these kids and young adults was an escape, again, take this with a grain of salt because I don't have statistics or data or accounts to back this up, but just through my own intuition and gut feeling from going over the evidence, I think that these people used D&D as a true escape. It was a place and a game where they could be themselves. And whether they were LGBTQ, trans, autistic, or what have you, D&D was their escape. And when it was targeted, they felt trapped. Like there was no way out. They couldn't escape anymore. So these people took the one way out that they could fathom: suicide. So here is the suicide hotline. I know that you're never alone in this community. Damn it. I'm going to go play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends. And I hope you can too. And thank all of you for entering the dungeon.
Last name? So I get any of these.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not much longer.
So you guys find yourselves in the ancient stone vault that lies beneath Isadurai, the ancient elder city of the kingdom of Kalabeth. You guys are standing in the main largely vaulted chamber that is dominated by this gigantic fire that roars all sort of around you. At the far end, there lies a stone plinth that contains the a demonic book that is etched in all sorts of runes that you are completely unfamiliar with. All you can tell, though, is that this book just exudes an unsettling feeling of evil, of some sort of dark energy that swirls around it.
Dungeons & Dragons has been around for nearly 50 years, going through various additions, upgrades, and changes. It's had untold amounts of merchandise made off the back of it, a bunch of video games, some of which are Ace, a cartoon series that isn't quite as Ace, a rubbish film, and a new film that is currently in the works with Paddington 2 star Hugh Grant. I only wanted to mention that because Paddington 2 is now officially the greatest movie ever made. Well done, old friend. In the last few years, though, it's become a pop culture behemoth. While it's featured in films like E.T. and TV shows like Community, Freaks and Geeks, The Simpsons, News Radio, and the IT Crowd, the Netflix series Stranger Things really put D&D back on the map, with its lead characters not only playing the game, but also naming their various monster adversaries after D&D characters. And of course, Matthew Mercer's Critical Role series has shed even more light onto the game in a really positive way. It's become so popular that they raised over $11 million on Kickstarter to turn their first campaign into an animated series that has been picked up by Amazon of all places to release later this year. I've been playing with this group now in the same campaign for about 4 or 5 years, playing as the same characters. And for the most part, some of them have been killed. And we all have a really great time doing it. Not only because our Dungeon Master has created an amazing world and crafted wonderful stories for our characters to interact with, but because it's given me an excuse to see and hang out with my friends every single week, which might not have happened without the game. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about D&D and what it's meant to pop culture, but at its very heart, it's a social game for friends to play together. And isn't that what's great about board games? But there was a
Hammer curls, 2-minute break.
wasn't seen as a pop culture icon, nor seen as something nerds did in their AV clubs like the little dweebs that they are. It was instead seen as an enemy to parents. Just like comic books and rock and roll before us and video games and slash movies after us, Dungeons & Dragons was thought to encourage Satanism, witchcraft, even suicidal tendencies. Parent groups were formed to demand down with this sort of thing. TV networks put on specials asking, has your child been exposed to Dungeons & Dragons? And one reverend even compared this simple pen and paper game where you play as elves and dwarves in a battle against evil to Russian roulette. And this is one.
I've never had a book on myself. It's pretty good. Shit, he's a youngin' too. I'll be 43 this year.
I do want to give a brief of Dungeons & Dragons and lay out some of the groundwork like any good YouTube video essay would, but I will spare you much of the detail because A, many people have done that before me, and B, they've done it better than I ever could. In fact, if you do want a really good history of the game, I would highly recommend Of Dice and Men by David M. Elwood. It goes into great detail about how the game was made and about the people who played it. This copy I have is very massive because I read it while trekking around Canada on my honeymoon. My wife really is a lucky girl. But to be brief, Dungeons and Dragons is a pen and paper game designed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and originally published as a box set in 1974. Then split into two categories in 1977, with basic D&D on one side and advanced D&D on the other. AD&D, as you would imagine, was made for more experienced players who wanted to expand the game, while basic D&D was there to be an introductory system for new players who might be put off by the mountain of paperwork that one must climb to understand AD&D. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons got a second edition in 1989, and hilariously, basic D&D got an expert set in the early 80s. The two essentially came together in 2000 when Wizard of the Coast released the third edition. The name was put back to just Dungeons and Dragons, so it's not put off any potential players. A few years later, version 3.5 was released, and some turned out to be the definitive edition of the game, which cannot be said for the fourth edition, released in 2007 with no
Alright,
one.
time for
Finally, we
Hammer
have the
Curl.
2014 edition of the game, or 5 years down the line, which added some new mechanics, but also streamlined and simplified some of the trickier elements of 3.5. Namely making it less around advanced mathematics and making it, fun to play. To play the game, you create a character and, well, that's about it. You and your group of friends who have also done the same thing will then be taken on a journey by your dungeon master who has created a world. What you do in that world is totally up to you.
Down, here you go.
Dungeons and Dragons is possible unless your DM says otherwise. Perhaps best summed up by this tweet that went viral back in 2018 by James Breakfast. I played Dungeons and Dragons with my daughters. They were supposed to fight the werewolves surrounding a town. Instead, they fed the wolves and turned them into their friendly army. You battle, bargain, and make all your decisions through this 1820. You will do damage with D8s and D4s and D10s and the like, but the outcome of this 20-sided die really does define everything. Yeah, I've scored modifiers on the character sheet that will grow over time, but simply roll high and you do well, but roll low and it's not quite such a good time. You think you've made a compelling argument to a group of soldiers not to attack you and let you pass, but then you roll your die, fail a check, and the next thing you know, you're having a scrap with soldiers that are way harder than you. Rolling a natural 20 or a nutty 1, as the cool kids called it, is called a critical success, while a natural 1 is called a critical fail. And you do not want those. For example, you could do a cool flip onto a table in the middle of a mess hall to fight a guard, only to critically fail your roll and have your DM tell you that you slipped on some salmon and are now laid prone on the table for a free hit by the guard, all while sticking for salmon. That is a true story, by the way. The longer you play the game, the more your characters flourish, their stats improve, you gain new skills, but more importantly, you become entwined with your character. At the start of my D&D campaign, I was just Luke Owen playing as Andor Windriver, but many years later, I now get into character when I'm playing the game. I am Andor Windriver, the monk from the Temple of the Owlbear who has mastered his key to control the elements around him.
Okay, you got it. I'm the avatar.
I don't make decisions based on what I think is best for the game. I make the choices that Andor would make. So that's a very brief and potted history of D&D. There's a lot more that we delved into. There's way more rules that I could discuss. Hell, I didn't even talk about the falling out of Breaker and its co-creators. But what I'm here to discuss came about shortly after the game release. Back in 1974, D&D was something for hobbies, but the release of AD&D in the basic set made the game slightly more popular. What was once only played by college
2 down,
students
2
now
go.
available in toy stores next to Monopoly. By 1980, if you put D&D onto something, it would sell. Even coloring books. They went from initially selling 100 copies a month to 7,000, 4 times more than the hottest game in the nation. And the game publisher, TSR, posted sales of $8.5 million plus. There was a downside to the success. D&D was now in the mainstream.
First time that D&D started to be painted in the mainstream as something potentially evil and bad was in 1979, when this kid, James Dallas Egbert III, disappeared from his college campus. He was a student at Michigan State University. And he disappeared. His parents were worried, his friends were worried, and so his parents sent in an investigator that hired a private detective to go find the kid. And the private detective looked at James's hobbies and activities and saw that James was really into playing this game he'd never heard of called Dungeons and Dragons, which seemed weird and had demons and spells and all kinds of stuff. And the private detective decided, you know what, this is probably what caused him to disappear. And when that broke out into the news, they were still looking for the kid, that really started to paint the game as something potentially dangerous, that kids would go crazy and disappear from.
The truth, however, really had nothing to do with D&D at all. Egbert was sadly suffering from depression, and his disappearance was in fact taking his own life. On August 16, 1980, he did eventually commit suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It was his third attempt. William Deere, the private investigator who found him in Louisiana, was told by Egbert that none of this was connected to D&D. But the idea of a kid playing this game with demons and spells sent him crazy to the point that he got lost in the steam tunnels underneath his campus was too good of a story for the media to ignore.
Newspapers and TV news wanted to cover that because there's a missing kid. That's new. It's sensational now. Now there's this sort of weird satanic aspect of kid missing in steam tunnels, thinks that he's a wizard. And so it got passed from newspaper to newspaper, what probably should have been just like a local news story of, have you seen this missing child? Became national and international news. This game has driven a kid batty, and we don't know what it is and why it is. And so that became the game's initial reputation for a lot of people, right? Nobody had heard of Dungeons and Dragons outside of these very small war games until this happened.
While William Deere did eventually reject the idea that D&D was connected to Egbert's death in 1984 book The Dungeon Master, saying that it was actually his domineering mother had struggled with his own sexuality and viewed with depression, novelist Roland Jaffa turned the story into two phases: Monsters, a story of a group of friends who hacked down their Dungeons and Dragons game, leading to one of them having a psychotic breakdown. The book was turned into a 1982 made-for-TV movie starring a very young Tom Hanks, who believes that he must jump off the top of the World Trade Center in New York and cast a spell on the way down so he can join the Great Hall and win this game in D&D. Suffice to say, it's not very good.
What am I doing here?
D&D was quickly connected to cult-like behavior and Satanism across America. In 1980, Heber City in Utah banned the game from being played in schools because townsfolk, quote, felt the game reflects operations of Satan and forces of communist subversion. A police detective was quoted in the San Diego Union Tribune in 1984 saying that D&D, quote, there are satanic figures, there are Antichrist figures. In 1985, following the suicide of a 13-year-old
To break, and then we're going to do the last exercise, which is Renegade Rules.
Which one parent said, quote, it's another of Satan's boys to loot and destroy
6 to 8 reps.
The state trooper that investigated the suicide, however, said Dungeons and Dragons no way taught his kids, noting instead that he was involved in drugs and had heated conversations with his mother. Eric Ferguson, a 14-year-old kid who played D&D with Cartier, told the New York Times, I'm sick of them saying Roland killed himself because of D&D. It was drugs. The school in question decided to let kids continue to play it, as one of the board members told that his daughter played it when she was 16 and was now happily married. In response, Reverend Robert O'Flynn, pastor of the Faith Bible Evangelical Free Church, told the board, quote, You have authorized Russian roulette. Over the months to come, there will be many thrilling and harmless clicks of the gun as Dungeons and Dragons is held to the heads of our young people. But another deadly explosion will.
Dungeons and Dragons had this weird situation where one, a lot of people thought it was satanic and bad, but then it suddenly exploded into popularity because A, there's this new distribution, there's the Red Box, which is in toy stores, so kids have access to it. But also weirdly, the reputation of it being satanic and bad, if you're a kid, you ate that up, like that made kids really want to play it more. So now you have this situation where kids everywhere are playing this game and love it and know what it is, but their parents still just think this is really satanic. And so you get these instances all over the US and some in Britain too, where anytime something bad would happen, parents or investigators would go and try to figure out, well, why did this happen? And when they did so, they'd search like the kid's room and find Dungeons and Dragons books. They didn't know what that was, but they'd be like, there's a demon on the cover of this, and inside there's like 12 pages which says spells. So obviously this kid's been corrupted.
That was certainly the case of 16-year-old Irving Culling, affectionately known as Big, who in 1982 committed suicide from a self-inflicted wound. According to a national coalition press release a few years later, Culling did this, quote, hours after a D&D curse was placed on him during a game conducted at his local high school. Like Egbert and Cartier before him, Culling was, sadly, another depressed kid in America who took his own life. His mother, Patricia Culling, was desperate to find answers, though. And because her son enjoyed playing Dungeons and Dragons, she latched onto this idea that the game was the reason he was dead. She attempted to sue TSR for $10 million, but that was thrown out of court. So then she set a public advocacy group, BADD, Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, in 1980. The group described D&D as, quote, a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic type.
So today is a whole thing, as you maybe think we should actually the whole thing all over body and your body. So we got four sets of 6 different people. So we're going to do different rows, bunch over rows, shrubs, hammer rows, and renegade rows. And renegade rows to be able to do ways of doing push up, and pushing up, rowing.
One down, 3 go.
You could do it in a kneeling position, where you split your back, over down here, and then row, or you can use a bench and row on the bench. Hand up. So, I don't know if I'm gonna feel like actually doing the bench right now. Let's see. It's here, but, let's see, oh, it is afternoon time, which is an unusual time for the administration. But I do have one tonight, set for a friend, and so I want to make sure that time and your brother will not have to work out after that. So, tonight, alright, so, that's it for last time over the high end of the range, it takes a full breath, and then 12 and 3. I think I'm going to play around today with doing the low end of the range, but raising the weight, right? So we did, yesterday, we did kind of opposite that because of how much I had already worked, right? I do kickboxing for an hour, I worked with a personal trainer for an hour, and so I opted to go a little bit later, but a higher range, so today we're going to go here and we will push. So we're going to go to 15. So,
Two down, two to go.
Here, fine. The water, I'm salting it, but I also have, a chuckle at the name, it's fruit dried, it's called, it's, it's got all kinds of good stuff in there. It's got potassium, vitamin C, rice, and vitamin B6 and B12, and some vitamins, so very good for muscle support and energy. I was supposed to have kind of maybe cola flavor kind of thing, and I don't know, I can't really put a thumb on the flavor, but it doesn't taste bad. It tastes fine. Oh, and I think I was thinking, oh yeah, energy blend is 120 milligrams of natural caffeine.
Keeping with the same energy as yesterday, I might do a bonus exercise. Probably just 25 kettlebell swings with my 75-pound kettlebell. Depends on how I'm feeling. 3 down, 1 to go. Renegade Rose is no joke.
No, I just replanted it. I just replanted it. Oh, yeah. First time today.
All right. So that's it. in there. Looks like tomorrow is abs. And then of course, the last day is legs. And that'll be the end. I'm still trying to figure out whether or not I'm going to do Avatar or Olympian for my month 3 of the year-long Dare Be challenge. So basically, last year's challenge was to do a challenge every month. This year's challenge is to do a Dare Be challenge every month for the entire year of 2023. Just pick a new challenge and do that shit. And I'm going, like I said earlier, I'm going on a cut. So this challenge is going to be less weighty and more about endurance and burning cows and things like that. So since I've gained all this muscle, I mean, I'm still going to do weightlifting so I don't lose muscle while I'm cutting, but I'm going to try to lift heavier instead of lifting more. All right, for the bonus exercise, we are doing 25 kettlebell swings with the 75-pound kettlebell. Let's get it cracking. I don't know, for some reason my glasses always fall off when I do these, so take them off. Oh. Kettlebell swings are a really good finisher for any kind of workout. So let's go. Alrighty, well done. See you guys tomorrow for ab day. Peace.